The Policy of Capitalist Monopolies, Part 1. Organizational Forms of Private Economic Monopolies. The distinctive features of each of the numerous types of private economic monopolies are determined by their organizational forms. The varying degrees of industrial cartelization also determine the degree of monopoly position of these enterprises in the market, which is the main goal of creating private monopolies. The implementation of this main goal depends, however, on certain techniques, means, and methods of unifying industry and constitutes the content of the policy of cartels, syndicates, and trusts. This policy can be considered from two sides. Firstly, in relation to united enterprises, in other words, in the field of relationships between cartelled entrepreneurs. And secondly, in relation to competitors, that is, entrepreneurs not included in the association, non-syndicate enterprises, or so-called outsiders. The policy of syndicates and trusts in relation to united enterprises can be aimed at various economic aspects of the enterprise, and therefore the policies can be distinguished. In the field of consumption or purchase, in the field of production, in the field of order allocation, in the field of price regulation, in the field of sales regulation. Cartel as a consumer or buyer of raw materials. In cases where the cartel acts as a consumer or buyer of raw materials and intermediate products, the following techniques can be applied. Setting maximum prices. A syndicate is a consumer purchasing products necessary for production. It is a wholesale buyer in which enterprises in the mining industry or the production of intermediate products are very interested. And since the acquisition of raw materials is often carried out by each enterprise separately, the establishment of maximum prices by the syndicate makes it possible to eliminate capitalist free competition between individual enterprises that act on the market as consumers and, in a fragmented state, find themselves weak in front of the heavy industry united in the syndicate. Joint purchase of materials needed for production in large quantities. In this case, the syndicate appears on the market as one whole, as a large wholesale consumer, and the conditions under which materials are thus purchased turn out, quite naturally, to be much more profitable than for individual purchases by each enterprise separately. Wholesale Purchasing Partnership. A special partnership makes these purchases, and it is called a wholesale purchasing partnership. When such partnership exists, purchases on a wholesale basis are not carried out randomly, not in each individual case, but constantly and systematically. Such a partnership is assigned a permanent and specific function from which other syndicate bodies are exempt. But such partnerships are created only in large associations, creating mixed or combined enterprises. Eliminating the dependence of syndicates from processing industries on the purchase of materials is best achieved by creating mixed or combined enterprises. The consolidation of enterprises of various successive stages of production into the same private monopolies is a natural process of industry unification resulting from the desire to reduce production costs, which is the direction of the entire policy of every private economic monopoly. By joining enterprises at higher levels of production to enterprises at lower levels of production, the syndicate implements the most rational method of acquiring materials and is freed from the dependence of syndicates that embrace enterprises that extract raw materials or produce intermediate products. Production regulation. Production regulation is carried out by a number of measures that involve expansion or reduction of production. Depending on the economic situation, on the expansion or contraction of market demand, which are taken into account by the central body of the syndicate, fluctuations in production should occur in the individual enterprises that are part of it. Strengthening production under the influence of favorable market conditions is a subject of constant concern for every individual entrepreneur. But fluctuations in market conditions are not always correctly taken into account by individual entrepreneurs. This function can most easily be performed by the central body of the syndicate, whose task is to prevent the expansion of production, which causes a crisis, and often the death of the entire enterprise. The efforts of the syndicate are therefore aimed at restraining the aspirations of individual entrepreneurs to expand production, which is often undesirable from the point of view of the monopolistic tendencies of the syndicate. The following techniques serve this purpose of the syndicate. Firstly, the prohibition of enterprise expansion. This is achieved by the fact that all members of the syndicate undertake for a certain time not to increase the number of machines accepted and the number of workers. Secondly, a reduction in production. Individual entrepreneurs undertake not to put into operation a certain number of machines, and thus during the production process only a part of the machines work. Thirdly, shutting down enterprises. What does this stop mean? A. General, when all entrepreneurs agree to stop work in their enterprises for a certain number of hours, days, weeks during the year. Or B. When individual shifts are cancelled, for example, night, Sunday, overtime, etc. Or C. Private, when some enterprise as a whole or parts of the enterprise, for example, a separate workshop of some plant, is suspended. Such a suspension usually means a complete closure of the enterprise. The enterprise is absorbed by another, larger one. Its owners receive either a ransom if there is a complete transfer of the enterprise into other hands, or rent if the enterprise merges with another larger one. Example of this is plant shutdowns in Europe, USA, and China during the pandemic. Fourthly, the closure of enterprises, to which such suspension boils down, is widely practiced by syndicates and trusts. For a syndicate or trust that unites many enterprises, it seems, first of all, extremely profitable to eliminate the few viable enterprises, either those producing at higher production costs or those generally in unfavorable conditions. The merger of such enterprises with larger and better supplied ones, on one hand, increases the share of participation of these enterprises, on the other hand, increases the concentration and growth of production within the syndicate. For example, immediately after its establishment in 1887, the Vodka Trust in the USA, out of 80 firms included in the trust, closed 68 and concentrated all production in 12 firms. Of the 18 factories acquired by the Sugar Trust, only 7 were left in operation. Conclusion. Private economic monopolies use their monopolistic position to extract maximum profit and forecast future overproduction. In order to prevent death of the entire enterprise, monopoly will put on hold all excessive production, lay down workers, and reorganize to stay afloat. All means and methods used in the beginning of last century are still used until this day by monopolies, which now hide behind anti-monopoly legislation.